So with me today, I have Tammy Foshee and Sarah Stanley Smith, who are two of our change management experts on the third stage team. Tammy is from here in the United States, where Parisa and I are based, and Sarah is based out of our UK office for our European market. So Tammy and Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Pleasure.
Sure. So I guess to start, and maybe I'll start with you, Tammy, on this first question, and then have Sarah build on this. But I guess the first question for you is, how would you define change management? It can mean a lot of different things to different people. It's a term that's often overused, misused. Technical integrators often have their own definition of what they think change management is. Maybe it's training, communication, or other things. But maybe just if we back up a little bit and just talk about change management in general, how would you define it?
Sure. I think I would define change management as applying a structured approach or methodology to moving people through change, whether that's at the individual, the team, or the organizational level. So I like to compare it to the way that, project management runs a project. It's a purposeful, structured approach, and that's what change management is to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes total sense. How about you, Sarah? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I completely agree. I likewise think it's kind of the organized transition to new ways of working. To kind of build on that, I kind of like to view it in terms of sort of four key areas. So it's that transition phase to a new way of working across processes, technology, structure, and skills. But then kind of underpinning or overpinning all of that is kind of the focus on people specifically. So how do people move through that transition? And it's kind of sort of helping smooth that transition and make it as sort of easy as possible for people to adopt the new ways of working.
Right. Now, if we look at any sort of digital transformation or business transformation, obviously there's a big impact to people. But what do you think makes change management so important? When you compare it to, call it the technical aspects of a transformation or the business process aspects or any other aspect. Why is the change management piece so important? Maybe what are your thoughts, Sarah?
Well, so for me, I think that without people, you don't have a project, right? So you can have, the world's leading technology, sort of all shiny, singing, dancing, all that kind of thing. But if you don't have the people there who are able to use the technology effectively and efficiently, there's no point in having it, right? You might well as just, not have bothered. So I think that's where change management really comes into its own because we're talking about people and helping people through that process and getting them to embed their new ways of working in order to support the technology that's coming in. So I kind of think without that change management piece, yes, you've got great technology, but you're not able to use it and sort of see the benefits of it.
Yeah, it becomes shelfware or technology that's there, but it's not being used. You're not getting the value out
Yeah,
of it.
exactly.
Yeah. How about you, Tammy? What are your thoughts on that?
To piggyback on what Sarah said, I think if you sort of go through this process to configure and build, the leading, best class technology, but you don't do the change management piece, you're going to have impacts to productivity. But on top of that, you're also going to have the frustration of the users who haven't been prepared, aren't ready to use it, don't understand, the direction that the business is moving in. And so any potential ROI or benefits you expected to achieve have literally gone out the window because you forgot the most important part, which is, preparing the people that will be using the technology. The technology is just a tool at the end of the day.
Yeah, in hearing you guys talk, it almost, and I'm trying to step back and not be biased because I started my career as a change management consultant as well. And, I certainly see the value and believe it's critical to any project. But even if I step back and just listen to your responses, it seems like a no-brainer, even if I didn't have that bias. So why do you think so many companies have trouble seeing the value in change management? Or why don't more people recognize how important change management is? Do you guys have a thought on that?
Yeah, I guess for me, there's a couple of things there. I think sort of number one, it's kind of fairly new in terms of a discipline compared to some of the other disciplines that we deal with. So I think there's still quite a lot of learning that people who aren't kind of deeply involved in change management perhaps need to go through. And I also think, obviously, with any kind of large scale project, there's always tight budgets and there's time constraints. And I often think that change management's seen by people who don't understand it as sort of a nice to have, or if we have time, let's do it. If we have some money left over, let's try and do it, rather than saying, actually, this is kind of a critical kind of linchpin to your program. So I think there's kind of a bit of a lack of education and awareness through people who perhaps don't understand it in as much detail because they're not as involved.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'd never thought about the maturity or the fact that it's a relatively new discipline and it hasn't been around as long as some of the other work streams that we commonly work with. So that's a really good point. What are your thoughts, Tammy?
I think the other challenge is that it takes so long to actually see the benefits of a change management program, right? You layer this on top of an initiative and you basically have to get to the point where the change becomes business as usual, and then you monitor the success of that change for, a certain period of time, maybe in your hypercare state. And it's not until then that you're sort of realizing the value of what you did. So I think the delay between, the level of effort that you have to put into it to implement it, the delay of how long it takes to actually see the value of the level of effort and the investment that you put forth. Because of that delay, I think it's sometimes hard to convince people who want some of that instant gratification.
Yeah, and it's a good point. It also seems like during these sorts of transformations, if I'm implementing new technology, I can see and touch and feel the technology. I know if it's working or not. It's pretty black and white for the most part. Either it works or it doesn't, and that's one piece. And then on the operational side, I can look at a process flow and I kind of know I can see where there could be a problem with that process flow. But the change management stuff, I can't see it, I can't touch it, I can't feel it. And by the time I do feel it, it's usually at go live, post go live. And it seems like that's another part of it is how do you, and I don't know if you have a good answer for this or not, but how do you get someone to feel the pain sooner of not having good change management? Because it takes, to your point, Tammy, it takes so long for people to realize the value. And on the flip side, it takes so long to feel the pain of not having addressed change management.
Mhm. I guess could kind of answer that a little bit. I always like to use examples of where projects have failed, where they haven't had the change management as kind of that example. Because if you can kind of relate it to a similar project, maybe that you've heard about or a colleague's been involved in, for example, and you can explain, this is what happened, and if we had change management up front and we had done X, Y, and Z, we could have mitigated that before it had, sort of uh, derailed the project, as it were. So I think it's really good to kind of use some real life examples in that scenario and just kind of try and really sell the benefits to people early on. So it's kind of people are bought into the whole change management workstream piece.
Yeah, it's a good point. You have to kind of illustrate the what ifs. What if we don't do change management? What does that look like? And what have other companies experienced that haven't invested in change management? What are your thoughts, Tammy?
Yep. I think another way to look at it is also to really look at the change and kind of break it down how much of the success of this change is dependent on people behaving differently or in new ways. And when you can look at it that way and you can sort of explain the continuum that people go through when they're experiencing a change, I think you can bring some of that, to the surface so people can really start aligning, the success of this project not only depends on appropriately configured technology, but it also depends on, individuals who are knowledgeable and ready and willing to work, in new ways in the future state.
Yeah, yeah. Do you guys ever see the dynamic or the with our clients? Do you ever see situations where the client says, "Hey, yeah, I get it that other organizations have struggled with change management, but our people are different. They're on board with this change. They're excited for it. They understand that the old way isn't going to get us to the future, and therefore, I think we're worrying about a whole lot about nothing because change management is not going to be a big deal for us." Do you ever run into that?
Yeah, I've seen that a couple of times actually, and I think it's sometimes it's a kind of people almost reassuring themselves that yeah, it's fine, we've got this, our people are great, and it's quite a dangerous assumption to make because until you've really uncovered, the culture and the nuances within a business, and you've actually gone and spoken to the end users, you don't actually understand how they're feeling and their understanding of change management. Um, and I think even in the best will of will in the world, if everybody's really up for the change and they're really excited and they're really on board, and there's none of that resistance initially, when you actually get into the nitty gritty and you actually start asking people to do stuff, that's outside of their business as usual jobs or their roles, and you're actually asking for people's time and commitment as part of the program, the change resistance then tends to arise, and it starts to appear and cracks start to show, and that's when you can really start to see projects actually derailing because of it. So I think sometimes people kind of lure themselves into a false sense of security that, yeah, it's great because our people are great. But until you've done that discovery piece and you've actually done that investigation, you can't be sure that that's the case. So, yeah, I found that a couple of times that it's quite scary to watch, really.
Yeah, and no amount of educating or case studies sometimes will help those situations or those instances where they have that false sense of security. How about you, Tammy? Have you seen something similar in your career?
Absolutely. I actually think this is probably one of the biggest pitfalls when it comes to organizations and their approach to organizational change is this over assumption that they know how their stakeholders feel and basically applying a generalized idea of how supportive the stakeholders will be. And I think every circumstance that I've been in where an organization tells me, oh, everyone, we've had the same ERP system for 20 years, everybody's ready for a new UI, everybody loves change, everyone's excited, you get into it, and that quote unquote everyone is a subset of 10 or 12 people that this person works directly with. And when you really look at the organization as a whole, that's when you really start to basically peel the layers of the onion back and you do start to see some of that resistance.
Yeah, kind of drawing out that potential resistance to change early on before it's felt or before the client necessarily sees it. Just being able to anticipate that can be very powerful. So, what do you see as some of the biggest pitfalls when embarking on a change management program or when helping our clients through change management programs? Why don't we start with you, Tammy?
Definitely the lack of an understanding of the role of sponsorship and modeling behaviors. I think a lot of organizations think sponsorship is I'm going to sign my name to some emails and I'm going to host a town hall. But the more important thing to me, from my experience when it comes to sponsorship, is truly modeling those change behaviors, right? So I was in technology implementation where the CEO was actually one of the sponsors, and we hosted a town hall event with actually about 400 people. This was pre-COVID, so everybody was in this huge auditorium, and he got up there and he was showing how he would log his own expense report, log his own time, and to me that went leaps and bounds for getting the rest of the organization on board, especially because those tasks were traditionally sort of passed on to admin assistants, and now there was this desire to sort of move to a culture of ownership of your own responsibilities. And him getting up there and sponsoring the change and modeling those behaviors, I think went really, really far. And I think that's something that is a huge pitfall because a lot of executives are very busy and they'll sign their name to the sponsorship role without really understanding what it means to be active, visible, and vocal.
Yeah, that's a good point. How about you, Sarah? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I guess it's kind of linked really, but I think for me one of the sort of key challenges is often, especially when you go into big organizations, there's kind of this misalignment of goals and vision. So you often get quite a lot of senior leaders within a company who all want to change, but they all want to change slightly differently. So you end up with sort of 10 senior people all kind of pushing and driving in slightly different directions. And then you kind of have this sort of level of middle managers who are trying to please their seniors, but kind of being pushed and pulled in different directions. And you end up going around in a big circle and nothing gets achieved, and you get very frustrated people. So I think it's super important that, everybody is kind of aligned and agreed on the goals and the vision really early on, and we all know where we're driving to. Because yeah, it's quite comical really, but it just goes round and round and round, and people get more frustrated and more fatigued, and it just doesn't work.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point, and it's a lot of it comes back to leading by example and starting at the top. I mean, I think ultimately you need the people at the top to drive and support the change in order for it to stick and for other people to follow.
Yeah, definitely. And I think actually then on the flip side, obviously we're talking top down. If you think about the bottom up level, I think sometimes we fail to answer, what's in it for me? That question that people, who are right on sort of the coal face, as it were, those end users who are actually going through the system changes and actually changing how they work. I think if the program fails to say, okay, so why is this important for that person? What, they're kind of sat there thinking, why should I bother? You're asking me to do all this stuff and attend all these workshops and give you all this information, but what am I getting out of it? So I think it's really important to make sure you kind of cover that off with, especially sort of groups of people that maybe kind of get forgotten until right at the last minute, by which point it's too late anyway.
Right. That's a good point.
I was just going to say, Eric, to Sarah's point, something that I've actually recently seen in the organizational change sort of network of thought leadership is this concept of, once you've established the what's in it for me, making sure that you also have established the what's in it for us. Because sometimes there are changes that don't necessarily have a direct benefit on an individual, but they're going to have a direct benefit on a team or the organization as a whole. And you have to be able to sort of paint that bigger picture, because there's a lot of sort of identity built up with the employee within the organization. So I think, what's in it for me has a long history in change management. And I think what's in it for us is sort of up and coming as its little sister or big brother, however you want to look at it.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, I have a few more questions for you that relate to more call it the tactical side of change management, and how you've actually executed some of these change programs in the past, and how one might get started on the change program, and a number of other questions. But first, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with Tammy and Sarah from the Third Stage team talking about organizational change management. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control. My name is Eric Kimberling. We'll be right back.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I'm here with Sarah and Tammy from Third Stage Consulting. We're talking about organizational change management. And before the break, we were talking a bit about some of the different work streams or activities that happen on a change management project typically. But what about the team itself and how a change team should be structured? What are some of the best practices you guys have seen in those cases? Why don't we start with you, Sarah?
So generally, yeah, sure. So generally, the sort of clients and the projects that I've been involved in, especially if they're big companies, and they've got sort of matrix organizations and it's global. In the past, I've seen you tend to have a change lead or a change director, so somebody who's accountable for the whole work stream. And in my experience, they tend to work side by side with the program director. So you've got that program focus and the change focus at that senior level. Then sort of sat underneath that, I tend to find that you have a number of business change managers who are doing the sort of core business change activity. And then if the program's got the luxury of having enough resource, you tend to have communications managers and training managers sat alongside them because in my experience at least, training and communications obviously are part of change, but they're specialised disciplines in their own right. So it's always good if you can have those managers in those positions that work alongside the change manager. And then obviously those resources are allocated out to different projects within the program, and you tend to work alongside your business analysts and solution architects and your project managers. So you have sort of separate project teams within that program structure. And that tends to be what I've seen work, and it tends to work quite well.
Right. How about you, Tammy? Have you seen anything different or any other ways that you've seen it work beyond what Sarah mentioned?
I think she described a great structure. The only thing I would add is, maybe the two ancillary sort of teams, which is the sponsorship of the project and sort of that change champion network that you would engage.
So I agree with you, Sarah and Tammy. That structure you just described, we've seen work really well at a lot of clients. In fact, most clients, it's worked well. We've had some clients, though, that have taken more of a in-house approach to change management, or they've wanted to integrate change management more into the operations and embedding it within what the project team might do or what the operational leads might do. Have you seen that work in the past, or what are some of the pros and cons of an approach like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's.
You go, Tammy.
Thanks, Sarah. I was just gonna. I think it's a great approach to really want to embed that, change management capability within the organization. And I think it can be successful on smaller projects, but when you have larger sort of transformational type projects with far-reaching impacts, I think you really need the expertise of a well-built capability and a mature capability that most organizations haven't reached, since it's relatively new to want to embed that capability in the organization.
Right.
I completely agree. I think there are pros and cons to the approach. Where I've seen it not work so well is if, say, like you say, Tammy, you've got quite a big program or project you need to deliver, and the change management is divvied up between your sort of business as usual type people. They often have their day job to do as well as their project role. And often, obviously, you get conflicting priorities, and people say, actually, I'm really sorry, I just don't have time to do the change management. And that's a real sort of hiccup that I've seen happen in the past, and it just becomes a nice to have and it gets forgotten about.
Yeah, it becomes easy to just assume that if I have to pick something to drop, I'm not going to drop the technology or the functional piece of it. I'm going to make sure that works, and I'm probably just going to drop change management. And it seems like a big part of this because you don't see or feel the impact of that right away, but you do see or feel the impact of not configuring a software solution or not defining a business process. You can see and touch that right away, but the change management percolates when you neglect it, and then it blows up at some point later on. So that's a good point.
When it's time to use the system.
Right. Yeah, exactly. When you go live and you post go live, that's when you really feel the pain of change management. And that's a big problem, I think, with just selling change management to a team, or emphasizing the importance to an executive team is, it's just hard to feel that pain early enough in the process.
Yeah, I always use the analogy of life insurance. It's definitely like life insurance for your project. And, that's something that we purchase, we invest in, to make sure that the people are taken care of when we are no longer here. And it's the same thing with change management. We have to invest and take care of the people to make sure when you go live, all the investment that you've made in that system or whatever that change is actually going to be able to be realized.
Right. Now, what about some of the change management challenges you guys have seen in your careers? Do you have a certain a case study or a client or a project, or maybe a particular example or situation that you feel was either the biggest or one of the biggest change management challenges you faced in your career? Why don't we start with you, Tammy?
Well, I would actually say on a project during COVID that was, going really well, great change management approach and strategy. And of course, the project sort of went on pause. And when the project picked back up, the executive team was really trying to sort of balance out message saturation. And of course, the COVID messaging took priority. And so this idea of preparedness and readiness for the organization for everything that we were working on took a back seat. And, we really sort of turned the corner with that, with some focused interviews and some readiness assessments to really say, people are getting this information from the news, from their healthcare providers, from their families, and from work. And knowing that the organization is continuing with the project and continuing to communicate and prepare them actually gave them a source of comfort that was unexpected. So it was extremely challenging to convince, the leadership team of that. But I think that's where having the data can match up with sort of what some people view as the softness of change management to change minds.
Yeah, absolutely. How about you, Sarah? What's an example or of a situation that was particularly tough from a change perspective, either a situation or a client that you worked with?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I tend to think all change programs are challenging, but there's one particular one that kind of sticks out for me. We were working as part of a sort of digital transformation team of contractors at a global car manufacturer. And there were two sort of key challenges with this particular client. The first one, that the organizational structure was highly devolved. So you essentially had loads of pockets of people, almost I kind of describe it as sort of 10 or 12 companies under this, company banner. They were all operating on their own systems, using their own processes. They weren't talking to each other, and it was a complete mess, to be honest. So that was the key sort of first challenge that we had. And the second one was sort of business as usual continuity. So essentially, if we broke any piece of that puzzle, the cars would stop being produced, stop coming off the line. And the senior guys, as part of that company, were saying, well, we can actually translate that to how many millions of pounds per hour we're losing, and that's the knock-on effect. So hugely challenging, hugely scary. But the way we got around that was, well, firstly, we had a really strong change lead who kind of had a grip on what actually needed to be done and how we were going to do it. So we had a good upfront, sort of robust strategy in place. And the second bit was we had a really lengthy discovery phase. So we kind of sold it that, obviously we can't break anything. And in order to not break anything, we have to understand everything first. So it was quite a hard sell, because obviously discovery costs money, but essentially it was right. Okay, we need to work out exactly what we're dealing with here, what systems, what processes, what people, etc. That's kind of how we got around it, but it was huge, absolutely huge.
Yeah, those are both interesting examples, sort of different examples, but a good reflection of the diverse challenges that come up during a change initiative, especially in a COVID environment too. You get some good points there, Tammy, about how to manage that soft side of change in a more digital, remote environment that a lot of us are operating in. How have you seen change management stay in sync? Or let me back up and rephrase the question. How do you suggest that companies keep their change initiative in sync with some of the operational improvements and the technical work streams and all the different pieces of transformation that happen? What are some high level tips you would provide to a team to help them keep their change management activities in sync? Why don't we start with you, Sarah?
So something I've seen that works quite well is having a dedicated change management board, almost. So, you have your key players from each of those areas that you describe, and they're all sat on a specific change management board. So I'm talking something that's separate from your program board, separate from your steering committee, separate from your high level exec board. So it's a dedicated forum where we talk about all the change management going on, and we incorporate all of those different pieces and take it into consideration when we do anything. But you really do have to involve all those key stakeholders, because for the best will in the world, you don't know what's going on unless you actually ask people.
Right. Yeah. How about you, Tammy? Anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I mean, the similar structure, something that I've seen work really well is the concept of a community of practice, with the change team and representation from generally the strategy or transformation side of the business. And I think a real key point here is actually making sure you're including the functional areas that are enabling the business to generate their revenue, right? So that's IT, HR, which are traditionally seen as, cost centers, but truthfully in today's world, they've been transitioning for a while, and I think they continue to evolve at a pretty rapid pace to be more of seats at the table, because they really are enabling the business. So really, I think a previous customer, they generated this community of practice, and they met every 2 weeks actually, just to make sure nothing slipped by them, and they were very proactive and prepared.
Yeah, that's That's good feedback and good advice. And speaking of advice, if we back up even more and just talk about how to get started, if I'm a executive or project team member that's on a transformation or planning for a transformation, what's the best way to get started in the process? What do you think, Tammy?
To get started in a process, obviously once you have identified the need for change and understand and appreciate that, I think alignment and setting expectations for me is the most important. To Sarah's point about her example earlier about a challenging change, every project that I'm on, the executive team, has a demand of limit impacts to our productivity. And I always meet that with, okay, well, let's set some realistic expectations and make sure that we're all aligned on, the activities that we can do, the timeline is realistic, access to the people, the team, the leadership, and the decision makers are realistic. And I think if you can start with that and gain agreement on all of those things, then you're really setting yourself up for success.
Yeah. You had several really good points there that we could further unpack maybe on a future conversation. What about you, Sarah? Anything you'd add to that as far as how do I get started? What do I do to just really start to launch my change initiative within my transformation?
Yeah, so I think completely agree with what Tammy says, and again, reiterating that understanding the challenge that you have. Once you have that understanding, I think it's really important that you fully resource your change team, because too often we say, oh, we'll just start with maybe a couple of resources and see how we get on, whereas a lot of the bulk of the work is done up front. So make sure you have adequate resources. Don't skimp on change management.
Right. And then last question for you both. It's kind of a loaded question, but ideally, when should change management start on a transformation? Who wants to answer that?
ASAP. ASAP.
Yesterday.
Yep.
If you're thinking transformation, you should have already thought change management.
Yeah.
I completely agree. I think loads of times I've seen cases where the change manager, sometimes myself, have been brought in far too late, and you're kind of playing catch up constantly. You're always one step behind the curve, and it's not helpful for anybody. So always good to be involved up front.
Yeah. In fact, Sarah, even I had a conversation today with a client that is about 4 or 5 months behind. And I guess on one hand, you say better late than never, but you're better off starting it sooner than you think. And a lot of companies think, well, let's get through the design phase first, then we'll get to the change management stuff once we know all the details of the change impacts and all that stuff. But even then, you're still behind the 8 ball at that point in terms of timing.
And I would say the thing I think people often forget is change management is different than every other work stream because it crosses all work streams. If you think of a technology implementation, right? You've got functional work streams, you've got security, you've got IT, but change management actually hits every single one of those because there are people in every single one of those that are going to be impacted by the change. So, and I think that's something people overlook and they try to sort of bucket it into, well, it is its own work stream. Well, I like to say it is the umbrella that sits atop all of the other work streams, right next to project management.
Yeah, that's a great point, a great place to leave it because I always, myself included, others a lot of times will think of the PMO as kind of that overarching umbrella, but really, I know you said change management can sit next to the PMO or next to the program management. You could argue the change management should really be the thing that everything reports up to or kind of feeds up to, because it is, everything does involve change. And you mentioned before, Tammy, everything from, the direct operations to HR to IT, there's a lot of impact throughout the organization. So it's definitely an important discipline, and one that makes it so cool, so much fun at the same time that it's misunderstood. So I think you guys have done a good job of hopefully helping the audience understand a little bit more about change management and why it's important and how to go about it. So thank you both for being on the show today. Really appreciate having you.
Likewise.
All right. Well, thank you again. We'll be right back with more from Transformation Ground Control. We'll be right back.